but it's already broken into. Oh, but it's only David. What a sight for sore eyes. David is there. And he's managed to track James's actions because the guy has gone through and attacked several of Lestat's agents and smashed through the roofs and tore everything up in the apartments, all because not only can't he control the strength, he enjoys the destruction of it. With the two of them working together, they start puzzling things out, knowing things about James as a person, and they figure out his alias. I think it's on the ID that Lestat gave him originally, but I can't remember. And they figure out that he's on this boat that James's father used to work on. His father worked on this prestigious cruise ship and got James a job there. And then James was caught stealing stuff from people, and he basically disgraced his father, and he was barred from the ship forever. When he was kicked out of the Talamasca, he was given some money, and then they refused his request to be sent to where he wanted to go on that ship, and instead flew him to where he wanted to go. A little slight that James has always been very bitter about and petty about. And in Lestat's body, however, he can go on the ship unnoticed, and it is convenient for hunting. And he gets all his petty revenge on the people that ran the boat and the Talamasca for not putting him on there in the first time. He uses his supernatural abilities to fly off the ship, and he attacks a family or two on that shore that they're at, and he steals all their valuables, and then he goes back to the ship and he hides. And then when they sail out the next night, nobody's ever be able to attach him to anything. He's always moving. That also helps him hide from other vampires because the boat is never in the same place, always moving. He's not always on board, too, so when he is on board, he's killing old ladies because apparently cruise lines have this high death rate for the elderly, and little old women love Lestat's body, so it's easy to get them in particular. So David and Lestat figure out that the boat is going to be in some islands or something off the coast of, I believe, Florida? I can't quite remember all the geographical locations, I apologize, but it is some islands, I think, near Florida. And because that ship's going to be there in a few days, they think that's the best time for them to get on board and find James. And the plan is formed that they will go under fake names with guns stashed aboard, and David takes care of both those things. And Lestat will make a grab for his body. He will push James out and shoves James back into the mortal body. And David will keep a gun trained on him. And Lestat, with his body restored, will run to a cabin much further down into the ship and collapse there because they have to do this very close to daylight, and then he'll end up succumbing to sleep automatically, so they have to really time this perfectly. This will leave Vampire James in the position where he can't run because the sun is coming up, and he can't risk attacking them because people will come due to the noise. So Lestat and David are in the town where the ship is supposed to pull in, and they stay for like a night and a day there or so, and this is where Lestat tries to get David into his bed. They're both mortal now, and Lestat has always loved David after all, and he couldn't really be with him as a vampire because David didn't want that type of love. And this is their one and only chance to be intimate like this, and David turns him down. Now, David can't articulate everything about why he doesn't want to, but part of it is just not wanting to lose himself. It's kind of a matter of pride for him to not yield to Lestat. I also think it has to do with his age. He's older, Lestat's in a younger body, and by the following night, Lestat's going to be in his vampire body again, and he won't have him anymore anyway, so it's like, better to love than lost than never to have loved at all. He'd rather just not go through that pain. At least that's what I think. They'll basically be back to where they were, and eventually David will die, so it'll all amount to nothing. Plus, I think David is self-conscious about his age and body. There's also the notion that Lestat's not even in his own body, so it kind of makes it weird to have sex with him. But, no, it's not just that. There's also priorities. David has to spend the time that they have left to them to teach Lestat how to fight back as a spirit and claim his body back. Because, James is an expert in this, and they need to go over this plan to the last detail, and they also have to brace themselves for all risks involved. So Lestat has to learn to rise out of his body at will and push the spirit out of the body he wants to go into. With James, it's going to be super difficult, as I said, because he's an expert, so there are hours spent between Lestat and David, where Lestat is pushing David out of his body and holding on to David's body for a few seconds at a time. When he's able to do this successfully, David says he's ready, and the next day, they'll get on the ship. And then it becomes a waiting game, and I think they actually take some time to scout the ship, go over the plan again, and they even visit James's cabin bribing someone and lying that David is the family doctor, and they have to take a look at this young man who they heard was sick. When they get into the cabin, it's actually really unnerving because Lestat wants to see his own body laying there, and he does. He opens up the lid of this chest, and it's curled up, and the arm slowly begins to rise before Lestat slams the lid back down. Yeah, vampires in this series automatically reach out and kill people who disrupt their resting places. But they're also unconscious. So I'm not sure exactly what extent this survival method goes to. Like, if you were to stumble upon a vampire, but you were on the outside, like, at the door itself, and begin to open it, would the body automatically fling itself up to yank you inside? They have David wander around the ship once night falls, counting on the fact that while James would recognize him if he caught sight of him, there are way more elderly people about on the boat, so David could easily blend, whereas Lestat would instantly be recognized. What makes this kind of funny to me is that all this precaution and stuff is kind of pointless because James shows up in Lestat's body in this dimly lit little restaurant on the ship, where Lestat is sitting at a table in the corner. And James doesn't see or hear him. Now granted, Lestat does explain that James is overwhelmed with the powers and can't quite control them. He didn't grow into the powers like Lestat did. But I could have sworn that increased eyesight and hearing is just normal for a vampire. Even Louis in the first book said that he could see in the darkness, and while mesmerized by the fact, I don't think it overwhelmed him. You basically can just see way more clearly now. So to me, despite Lestat hiding behind some people and trying to control his beating heart so James wouldn't notice, makes me think that James should still have noticed him just by looking over in that corner. Which, he did end up looking in that corner, but he didn't see him. Oh well. James doesn't see him, isn't paying attention, he's just surveying the room and is absorbed into the atmosphere, so I guess he's not paying attention. This actually gives Lestat hope, because once he stops panicking, James can't control his powers, not even the most basic of seeing in the dark. And when David gets back, they wait until early morning, and they decide to spring their trap. They go to James's room and confront him. Needless to say, James is really pissed off, but he can't do anything, and Lestat pushes his spirit forward, and he does it. He gets back into his body, and he dashes away to the secret below-deck compartment as his body starts getting slower and tired because the sun is rising. And as he's running, he hears a gunshot, but he can't do anything because if he goes back, James will try to reclaim him, and it's pretty much dawn. He gets to the safety of the room in the nick of time, and he slams the door, and he instantly is out. When he wakes up the next night, people that work on the ship catch him up because they think he's still James. Apparently, 2 people under false names were in his compartment, and one had a gun and is a known criminal, Lestat's human body, and one is David Talbot, who went easy. He was under a pseudonym, and he pretended to be your doctor. My god. But the criminal had jumped over ship, and they have no idea where he is, but the guy was escorted out. There is a message from this David person to meet up with him at some hotel in Florida. It's a few days before he does go, and he's readjusting to his body, and he's, relishing his powers again. And he visits Gretchen in her jungle. She's surrounded by sickly children. When he comes upon her, she recognizes that he isn't a normal mortal man, and instantly is afraid of him and tells him to get away from the children, and she starts throwing prayers at him, though they are completely ineffective. And Lestat keeps assuring her that he's not going to hurt them, he's not there to hurt them. And he is Lestat. He's the one that she took care of, and that they made love, and that he kept his promise to come to her and prove to her that he was in fact telling the truth about being in the wrong body. She claims that he's a liar, and she's scared of him, and she tells him to leave, and then she starts bleeding from the wrists, and she starts claiming that she's a stigmata, and that makes Lestat 100% sure that he's lost her. She's too far gone, and will never join him in eternity like he hoped, and with tears in his eyes, he leaves. Simple as that. A simple goodbye Gretchen, and he's just out of her life. When Lestat finally arrives in Florida, he meets up with David and asks for an account of what happened after he left for the little secret room. And David gives him the account that he fired the gun at James in the young body because he attacked him, but it didn't hit him, it didn't hurt him, and the man fled, and David was escorted off the ship. Simple. It's not a big deal. Everything's fine. They chat for a while, and the conversation goes from things like, being human Gretchen to vampirism. And David, who has refused to this point, suddenly wants it. He wants to be a vampire with all the things that have happened, he wants it. And in Lestat, especially after losing Gretchen, is full of just giddy joy and nervousness. David, his dear beloved David, wants to join him. And in making David, he will finally obtain a true, loving intimacy that is unparalleled to anything, even the sex that David had originally refused. And he asks him several times if he's sure he'll remain in this form forever. Is his hair okay? And things like that. And David keeps assuring him that's fine. No time to lose. Let's just do this. The adventure really brought his zest back for life. And despite his age, he wants it. And he wants Lestat. What I also think is a really nice touch is how shy Lestat is about the whole thing. Remember, biting and blood drinking is a pleasure unknown to any mortal, and it's love and it's lust all mingled, and he gets to share this with somebody he's been after for 6 years, someone who might die at any time simply from being old. And he isn't quite looking at David as they go back to the hotel room, and his heart is just pumping, and it's just so cute is what I'm saying. It's so cute. It's like going on a date with somebody and you're shy, and I like you. So cute. When they get back to the hotel room, Lestat embraces David and drinks, and at first the images feel like David, focusing on a tiger in a safari, an adventure that David had gone on in his youth that Lestat had read about. And Lestat is quite taken with that story and the image of David, and it's so good, and everything's great, and then the images start to shift. And oh my god, it's James. These memories that are now altering are James. Lestat is pissed, and he pulls away, and he flings James away from him. And before James can really utter anything more than "don't be hasty," he's picked up and tossed at a wall, and his head is crushed. And then he's delirious, and he starts begging for his mother, and Lestat is just panicked, and he's like, oh my god, what did I do? And he calls this hospital, and he prays that James will live. He's in David's body. He just killed David. Oh my god. I mean, there's a chance that he could save him, but oh my god, it's so slim. Oh my god, what has he done? And he goes to call the Telematica and tell them what's happened, make them aware of David, but David's already there. He had managed to escape the boat, using some connections to get out of the country, figure out where James had taken his body, and meet up with Lestat. And he's in the young man's body. He's in the young body. David is ecstatic. He's in this brand new body. He's young again. Granted, he'll lose his home and everything because it died with James, because James is in David's body and everything is in David Talbot's name. But Lestat promises to get it all back for him if he wants it, so it's no concern. Everything seems to point to a new beginning for David and Lestat, but after this, Lestat feels that he's lost David forever, that David will now never accept the dark gift. David was elderly and near death, and death can make people desperate to live. But with David being young again, he doesn't have that leverage anymore to convince him. He'll get another 70 years of excitement, and Lestat knows that the thrill of it will push David away from him. He won't have a spot for, Lestat in his life. And that David will ultimately choose to be mortal. And he tells David that should he ever need anything, he can just ask, but he leaves, and he's sad, and he's miserable. Now he goes to New Orleans, and while I should do a video about this later, while I kind of agree with Louis, and I understand Louis' sentiments, I have to give Lestat this moment, is that there's this perfect mic drop moment. He's got Mojo with him, having collected him from this little lady he left Mojo with to watch over, and he goes to New Orleans, and he's in this crowd where Louis is prowling. And it needlessly, this gives Louis a big shock. Okay? It's like, starts him, Lestat fucking winks at him, and then slowly turns and fucking walks away to this nearby church, not bothering to look to see if Louis is following him, but knows that Louis is following him. Because at first, Louis doesn't know if that's James in Lestat's body come to kill him, or if it's Lestat, and I think the little wink is what clues him in that it's Lestat. Funny enough, he actually stayed away from Louis for a few days because he was so legit pissed and hurt at Louis that he was actually scared he was going to kill Louis. Like, that level of pissed. So he stayed away from him for Louis' sake. Louis comes in all nervous and timid, and he does ask, you burnt my little house down, didn't you? Of course of course it was Lestat. He loves you and trusts you, and then you turned your back on him as far as he's concerned. Granted, I will make a case that Lestat's fucked you over way more times, okay? He made you in ignorance, he didn't explain himself very well, there's elements of abuse in your relationship, but in his mind, you just did not have the right to take the choice from him, even if you thought you were helping him. Louis, your Catholic guilt and wanting to save Lestat's soul. They end up bickering, and Lestat shouts, and he refuses to tell Louis much about anything of his experiences, despite Louis asking him. But Lestat does eventually ask him to live with him in their old flat, and he does eventually forgive him, but he's still kind of mad about it. It's actually just a nice scene between these two very love-hate relationship people. It's just interesting, okay? Lestat after this goes back to David, and David has a few days enjoying being young again. He can lift things with ease, he can run and swim, and he's handsome again. And Lestat decides he's going to reward David. Not how David would want to be rewarded, however. Lestat says this is how the devil rewards his followers, and he's going to make David into a vampire. David tries to run, and he just begs him not to, and he reminds him of Claudia, and he tries to summon spirit to repel Lestat, and none of it works, and Lestat's fangs sink in, and he drinks, and he's caught up in the frenzy of the real David's essence and his memories. And he does pull away, and David says that he loves him, and that he's dying, and please don't let me die, basically. I'm paraphrasing, because I just remember the I love you parts. And Lestat says, I love you too, and he puts his bit open wrist to David's mouth, and David drinks. And then he dies, and then he is reborn. And at first he's dazed, and he has to clean up. And then he goes out and hunts, after very angrily asking Lestat why. To which Lestat replies, he's always been evil. David surely knew this. And Lestat wanted him. And David throws back that Lestat had a choice, and he was just mad that his adventure ended badly, but David had gained so much, and basically Lestat was petty and jealous. And he is a fucking monster. And all this leaves Lestat feeling not triumphant, but miserable, and he shuts in on himself, and David leaves to hunt. For a few nights, though, David doesn't come back, and Lestat can't find him. Eventually he gives up, and he goes back to New Orleans to his flat, and he finds Louis there and tells him to not even bother asking what he's done or where he's been, to which Louis replies that he's already known the whole story. And as they come around the corner, Lestat's startled to see David, smiling warmly at him. Now, David basically says that he did want immortality all along, but would never ask for it. There's why he would never ask for it, and so because the choice was taken away from David, he did feel that he had a right to punish Lestat for taking the choice away from him, but he came back because he loves Lestat. So, starts what seems to be a new little family for Lestat, Louis, and David. Lestat's got two lovers under his roof, and the story leaves us with a sense of peace, I suppose, and anticipation as they plan a trip to Rio. This story is just utterly rich and fascinating. The scale is brought back from the grandiose size of Queen of the Damned to the quiet of our few familiar faces, and it feels like a genuine continuation from the other story. It feels that time and weight has been added to these characters, and we focus on their interpersonal relationships, their love, and their hate. The adventure is highly intriguing. Again, a vampire turning into a human being, that's compelling, and there are no missed opportunities to contemplate mortality and suffering, and I think, based on my previous experiences with Anne Rice's work, there's this kind of fear, and then trying to reconcile it, of death. A normal, natural fear, but this theme of not wanting to die, and about not being one of the billions that do it, has been there since the beginning, and Lestat, once faced with real death, decides he doesn't want to die. He doesn't want to be one in a billion. He often makes references to the fact that anyone who he ever knew is now dead and rotted away, and he doesn't really remember them, and he just does not want that. And with David, he's watching David die, and he's seeing this man he loves decline, and he just doesn't want that to happen to David. The pacing goes well. I never really felt bored when I was reading this. I will say it's very, very much an armchair philosophy type book with all kinds of conversations you would have at like 3 in the morning after something has gone down, and it's all about the nature of good and evil and whether there's a higher power and the fear or lack of death. It's a lot of that kind of thing. You have to take enjoyment in contemplation of deep concepts and whether or not you agree or not with the characters. There's a lot of nuance you have to be willing to think about. No answer is spoon-fed to you. You need to come to your own conclusions. There's a good amount of mystery and discovery that we get to enjoy, like how they figure out if when James is on the boat and how he's able to kill the coasts and everything else. There's a sense of danger because we don't know if all of them are going to make it out. I mean, Lestat is the main character and the book is old and we know that he does survive. But if you were reading this book back in the day, it might have not been certain what was going to happen. And I think it was very well crafted with that idea in mind, and I think it went very well. And I've had a blast rereading it. And I honestly think that if you've been reading the other books, you should consider reading this one too and continue on the story.